Since the 20th century, planes have always been the first choice of people for traveling internationally and long distances. While planes are an efficient form of international travel, there is just one small issue that would make it nearly impossible to travel by plane. That issue is the location of airports. For airports to work properly, a lot of them have to be built far outside of a city. But Transit Diaries, what about London City Airport? Yes, some airports do exist in city centers, but that's uncommon and is only in a few cities around the world. Today, I'll be talking about most airports. In today's video, I'll be talking about how different modes of transportation work together to make each other's travel more efficient and benefit those visiting or living in that city. I'm the Transit Diaries, and you are watching Transport Talk, Airport Railways. Let's talk about airports and the one problem that they face. Airplanes are a very efficient way to fly very long distances, and for this, airplanes of course need airports. Unfortunately, a downside of this otherwise efficient transport system is the space needed to accommodate its facilities, from runways to gates to hangars, and its noise pollution, which altogether lead the facilities accommodating it to be built on the outskirts of cities. So the issue is getting to the airport. Because a system like air travel could be immensely efficient, but if you couldn't even get to where you're catching your flight, what's the point? Thankfully, for hundreds of years before air travel, we have already had a pre-existing solution: railways. Conveniently, railways existed for a long time before airplanes or airports ever did, so the perfect mobility idea was just to build an airport next to a railway track, thus providing a way of mobility away and to the airport. So why does a rail connection make an airport brilliant? This is because it provides a quick and efficient transfer from your flight into the city. Remember that one main issue I talked about earlier about airports? Well, trains, thankfully, complement this issue. It fills in for the accessibility of airports. Since trains and their facilities are a lot more friendly for urban environments, they can have stations built directly in the center of the city. If you look at most cities in the world, the train station is in the center of the city because these locations were built a long time ago. If you look at the US, for instance, you can see that towns were literally built around the railways. Wherever a railway was built, they built a town next to it. This was because travel to other cities was easier, as well as complications such as freight and logistics. And so this historic advantage of being built in center cities allows an airport to essentially give access to the center of the city through its partner, which is the railway. And so a good domestic transport system such as the railway that connects to an airport provides near seamless international travel from your doorstep to the airport all the way to the other country you're in. So with this railway option, it makes airport travel much more comfortable and efficient. It began when there was a logical connection that was needed to connect an airport, so of course they chose railways. The first ever known airport to do this was the Berlin Tempelhof Airport, which opened in 1923. The station opened shortly after the airport's opening in 1927, and it was part of the Berlin U-Bahn, and it was named just Airport when it was opened. Today the station is now just known as Paradestrasse, and the airport is now defunct, and it has been defunct since 2008. And so, what makes a good airport railway connection? We can split these into 5 categories: speed, purpose, comfort, accessibility, and of course, price. First, let's start with speed. What makes speed important in an airport railway? Well, pretty much everything. It's probably the most important factor of these 5. When arriving from a long-haul flight, or just any flight in general, you typically feel tired and just want to get to your home or hotel. So getting there quickly is probably the most important, as you don't want to just sit on a train for 40 minutes and just feel this awkward zone between not being comfortable falling asleep there and waiting to get to your destination. This can also be affected by the frequency and the kind of rail transport options that are available at the airport. But in order to beat the fierce competition that are airport taxis, you really need good frequency. As frequency helps with speed, you don't want to wait around with your suitcases for 15 minutes to wait for your train, especially if the train trip takes a long time as well. But the key thing in having frequent service is to always have a train waiting at the airport. You want a relay-style service, where a train waits at a station with its doors open to give a comfortable amount of time for passengers to get in the train, and then the train only leaves when the other train arrives on the other track. This way, there is always a train at the station, which will make it much more comfortable for passengers, as they can just get on the train while the train is stationary, and then they won't have to worry about waiting or anything else. But of course, having a frequent service isn't worth it if the service takes a long time to reach the desired destination. And that brings us to our next topic, which is purpose. The purpose of the train service is what the service was originally made for. Was it made to transport airport passengers? Is it a metro line? Or is it an intercity service? It's what kind of service is connected to the airport. In an ideal situation, you want as many modes of rail transport as possible, from domestic lines to intercity. Intercity lines especially are what can contribute to the ability to get a cheaper flight. So, how does that work? Let's say that I want to go to Berlin, but flights are too expensive from my city to Berlin. So, I just take a flight to neighboring city Leipzig, and then I take the airport train from Leipzig to the central station. From the central station, I can take the intercity train to Berlin. Even though I would still have to pay for the train ticket, it still would wind up being cheaper than the flight to Berlin. Airport rail connections make many different travel opportunities possible, not just from the airport to the city, but also from a different city to help people save money. Without a rail connection, the same task would be inconvenient. Subscribe to my channel and join my Discord server for more cheap flight tips. So anyways, what is the best kind of service to connect your airport to? Most likely, it is an airport express service. A lot of major cities have an airport express service. This is because it provides the quickest way to get from the airport to the city center with a minimum amount of intermediate stops, which also allows for the purpose to be dedicated to airport passengers. This means that it can have luggage racks, and the train can be set up for airport passengers in general, with heavy suitcases and many other things. The next best thing to have connected to your airport is also an intercity train terminal. This also makes travel far more convenient for people whose end destination is outside of the city, for instance living in a village or a small city outside of it. This way, with domestic and intercity transport links, it makes the airport very accessible. And then it also makes that cheap ticket method I talked about earlier more possible. A local metro or tram connection is also decent, but the issue is its amount of regular commuters, which makes it crowded, and then the fact that its purpose wasn't made solely for airport riders, so it doesn't have accommodations such as heavy luggage racks, etc., because it is oriented towards capacity and not comfort, which is our next category. So, what makes a service comfortable? This could mean many small factors. Comfort is a combination of all sorts of small factors, from seat comfortability to the station. It is also a combination of the performance of the other factors listed, such as price, accessibility, and speed. So let's talk about something that is actually a standalone thing in comfort, which is train amenities. Of course, you want to make a service desirable in order to get riders. So you want things such as accessible bathrooms with good amenities, comfortable seats, helpful staff, and a smooth ride. And all of them have to work together. You could have the most luxurious train in the world, but if it's running on horrible rails and super bumpy, you're probably still not going to get very many riders. They would jump out of your train and go on a run instead. But of course, even if you have your comfort sorted out, no one's going to ride the train if it isn't a good price, which is our next category. Now, with airports, charging a steep fee for anything is pretty common, so most service providers can get away with charging somewhat of a high price, especially if the speed and comfort is high, as most people would pay anything to just get the whole travel endeavor over with and go home. The price you charge typically depends heavily on all the factors plus the competition's price. But the one thing you could beat the competition with is the next topic, which is accessibility. Around the world, not many vehicles are wheelchair accessible, but trains have a very high potential for being wheelchair accessible, which can lead to an advantage. But besides wheelchair access, I am talking about station accessibility. If the station is outside of the terminal, it may be less desirable to use that service. Most airport travelers are incredibly tired and just want the quickest form of mobility. And if the station is right there inside of the terminal, it makes it super desirable. And that can also give you the ability to charge a very high price, given that your service has a high comfort rating. And if you have this for both domestic and intercity trains, it can make the airport access very good, as well as comfortable transport to and from the airport, which benefits everyone, including the airport and the railway company. But of course, you have to have very smart positioning in your terminal, as a couple meters extra of walking could mess everything up. For instance, Washington Dulles International Airport's metro station, which is a good couple hundred meters outside of the airport terminal, which makes it far less lucrative versus if the train was actually in between the departures and arrival areas. Well, it looks like we're done covering the things that make an airport wonderful, and its addition, which is the airport railway. If you want more content like this, please give me feedback in the comments section, like, subscribe, turn on that bell, and especially join my Discord server, which is a very cool transport server with like-minded people. I'm the Transit Diaries, and as always, stay tuned for more.